Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Okay. Let's see. And I need to see here. I think, yeah, we're actually here. Let's see. Where am I? Aha. There it is. Yes, got further than I thought. Okay. Yes, here we go. I think we got everything done as I recollect. Yeah, yep. Right here. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Here we go. Beit El. So let's take a look at the verse. Vaye'atek misham hahara mikedem levetel. It's terrible, isn't it? I don't recollect doing this. Uh, does anybody recollect us doing this?
No, I don't think you got that
Good.
far.
Okay, all right. Very good. It's terrible. Short-term memory, though. What can I say? All right. So the verse, let's make sure we get the verse done. I do remember, I believe, doing the verse, right? That he picked up it, he disencamped, right, from there to the mountain on the east of Beth El, Vayet Ohalo, and he pitched his tent. Beit El Miyam, Beth El being on the west, V'ha'ai Mikedem. Remember, because I remember discussing I and the story of I with you all, and maybe that's where we stopped. Vayiven Sham Yizbech Lashem Vayikra B'Shem Adonai. He built there an altar for the Lord, and he called there on the name of the Lord. And I have this recollection that we did do that. Okay. All right. So, okay. All right. Amar Rabbi Elazar, said Rabbi Elazar, Le'olam yakdim adam tefillah letzara. And again, I seem to recollect us doing this as well, right? That a person should precede prayer before the trouble. Remember discussing this with you. She'ilmalei hikdim Avraham tefillah letzara. Because were it not for the fact that Abraham had preceded the trouble that was coming before with his tefillah, with his prayers of praise and supplication, etc., etc. That's the Vayiven Mizbeach, right? He built the altar. Vein Beit El Vein Ha'ai, and we notice between Beth El and I, and notice that Beth El comes first. Okay, because remember, perhaps now I told you the story of Ai, how it was the second city in the conquest of the land of Canaan, and how the uh, they lost that battle to begin with. We talked about, okay, this, mm, ah, I didn't. It's in another class. That's amazing because my other class is not this. My I didn't discuss this with you. So, all right. I'm confusing two different classes, all recorded now, right? So let me explain. So I was the second city that the Israelites were to conquer in the conquest of the land of Canaan. And after the conquest of Jericho, they attacked Ai and were defeated. The people of Ai defeated them. And the reason why is that when they conquered the first city of Jericho, they were told not to take any booty whatsoever. They were not to personally benefit, other than the conquest of the city itself, of anything. And there was a person by the name of Achan who secretly kept a couple of items and hid them in his tent. And because the Israelites had not fulfilled that agreement of not personally benefiting from the conquest of Ai, they lost that battle. And Joshua was beside himself. He tore his clothes in anguish over this because you can imagine what a shock this was to the Israelites who felt that had asked them to do this, that God would support them, that God would make sure that they would conquer. And of course, the way they defeated the city of Jericho was close to miraculous, etc. And so God informed Joshua that there had been a a trespass that had happened. And so Joshua had to find out, and they finally found Achan. They found what he had taken, and they punished him severely. It was a capital offense because what he had done, I believe some Israelites had died in that battle against Ai. And there's some beautiful commentaries actually that say that Achan would in fact inherit the next world. That what in the words of that Joshua says to Achan, he implies that he is only losing this world. A lot to unpack in this, which is not the cause of our class. I just wanted to give you some background. So that is the tzara that we're referring to. And it's so interesting, if you'll allow me to comment, that in my other class, which doesn't deal with this particular, it's a totally different class in Midrash Rabbah, but where we came across this particular reference to Joshua and the city of Ai, but in a whole different context. But here it is saying that, as it were, Abraham, as a prophet, had some sense of what I was going to be, and that's why he put prayer before the tzara. And let me finish up the phrase: Lo nishtare mison ehem shel Yisrael sarid ufalit. There not one remote survivor of the Jewish people would have remained had Abraham not done this. They would have totally been overwhelmed by the people of Ai and subsequently destroyed by the Canaanites had Abraham not prayed first. So again, just lots in a way to unpack here. I do want to explain, if I have already, I'm going to do it again. This is an example of euphemism, Sonehem Shel Yisrael, the ones who hated the Jewish people, in other words, anti-Semites. But it's actually a reference to the Jewish people themselves. It's a way of not wanting to say about the Jewish people, not even to put into words that not a part or a remnant would have escaped. Okay, so interesting. So let's take a look. So here we go. We're on, this is passage Yud Bet here. Lishna Ma'alya Nakat, right? He says, I think here he's saying that he is trying to use euphemistic language. I believe that's what he's saying. I will tell you that the Hebrew term for euphemism is Lashon Sagi Nahor, which means language filled with light. And that's again a euphemism itself, and ironic, because euphemism obviously is not saying everything or not giving the whole bit of information. But that's why he's saying Lishna Ma'alya. Ma'alya means like exalted language, right? Veromez, and he is alluding to El Hamilchama, to the battle Shahaita b'mei Yoshua, that was during the days of Joshua, im Yoshvei Ha'ai, with the inhabitants of Ai, right? Which Ha'ai, Mikedem lebeit El, on the east of Beth El. Ve'nakfu Yisrael, and the Israelites were smitten mipnei ma'aseh Achan, because of Achan's deed. Joshua chapter 7. Hu hamakom, right? Shebo hitpalel Avraham. And that is in fact the place where Abraham had prayed. So there's the literary connection between, and the well, it's more literary than historical, but in a sense, the connection between this story here about Abraham and subsequently what happened in the days of Joshua centuries later. And I will tell you that so much of Abraham and the patriarchs is a foreshadowing of what subsequently happens in the history of the Jewish people. Right? So there's that idea of foreshadowing. Again, a literary device. And this stood right? To protect, understood, for the Jewish people. This stood on their side. Shelo nikfu kulam b'oto milchama, that they weren't entirely smitten in that particular battle. V'nir'eh, and it would appear, kavana, that the intention of le'olam yakdim adam tfilah letzara, that us making this statement that a person should always precede prayer to trouble. Ritzono lomar, what he wants to say is le'olam yitpalel adam, that a person should always pray. Af she'ein tzarich, even if it doesn't seem necessary. Az tzarich az lo tatfila, even though it doesn't seem that that prayer is necessary. In other words, technically Abraham may not have had a clue about what subsequently was going to happen to his descendants under Joshua, and yet he still prayed at Ai, or at Bethel. Ki lo yeda ha'adam, because a person doesn't know et asher yeh ba'otid. He can't foretell the future. It's an insurance policy, if you'll allow me to kid a little bit. Asher yuchal liyot shezot, because it's quite possible, shezot atfilah, right, tagen olav, that this prayer that he's having right now, even though he has no clue as to what might subsequently transpire, but this prayer can shield him, right? It'll protect him. Be'ezezman min hazmanim, at a certain time of the times ahead. Ukamo betfilah zo, and it's as if in this particular tefillah to Avraham, of Abraham, shehigina bedorot harbe be'atid, that in fact it protected them in many subsequently after many generations. V'hu me'ein inyan hakatuv b'kohelet, and this you could say is reflected in a statement in Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes. It actually is a favorite statement of mine. Shlach lachamacha al pnei hamayim, cast your bread upon the waters, ki berov hayamim timtza'ena, because you will find it after many days. It's a very metaphoric proverb, right? But it's saying, you do good things, and you never know how in the future it'll come to benefit you. And I would tell you, without unfortunately being able to provide you with specific examples at this moment of times in my life when this has happened. I could say, maybe. I could say, look, I cast my bed on the waters in Canton, Ohio, and here it is. Here's me joining class after many days. I had no idea that this would be possible. So there's an example. It's a lovely example. All right. So going on. Next verse. Let's at least take that, try and see that. Okay, here we go. Vahi ra'av ba'aretz. There was a famine in the land. Now get the picture. Abraham has been told by God to go to the land of Canaan. He winds up in the land of Canaan, and in a sense, no sooner does he wind up there, but there's a famine in the land. Now, if Abraham were a common person, he would say, God, why did you do this to me? You asked me to go here. I'm going here, and now there's a famine. But he doesn't, at any rate. So, he doesn't complain. Vayered Avram Mitzrayma, and so he goes down to Egypt, parallel to Joseph and Jacob, etc. Lagur, that is to live temporarily. Sham, there. Ki chaved hara'av ba'aretz, because the famine was very heavy in the land. It's a really tough famine. Let's go on here. Vayered Avram. Abram went down. Tanu Rabbanan. Our rabbis taught. So this is a source that is prior to the year 200. It introduces a rabbinic source that is not in the Mishnah generally, but is outside, but is nevertheless contemporaneous with the Mishnah. Ra'av ba'ir pizar raglecha. if there is a famine in the city, move your legs, right? Spread, get going. Shne'emar, because it says, Vahira of Ba'aretz, because it says right there was a famine in the land. Vayered Avram Mitzrayim, Lagursham. Abram went down to Egypt to settle there temporarily. That is a very important little phrase here, that his intention was always to return. That's the point of this verse, these little words there, that when he went down to Egypt, it was purely a temporary measure. Ki gaved harav ba'aretz be'eretz Canaan, because the famine was so heavy in the land of Canaan. But this is important here. This is important here, and I don't know if it's going to be referenced, but I think of another case where someone actually, well, I'm talking about post-Torah times in the book of Ruth, where Naomi's husband and her two sons, the family, leave the land of Israel. There's a famine, and they go down to the land of Moab, and the consequences are disastrous, and there's a discussion in the rabbinic material as to why and whether they shouldn't have left after all. And remember, circumstances alter cases, and there are reasons given for why what they did wasn't a good thing. Here it is clearly being mandated, interestingly enough, and it's possible that the circumstances were different here, etc. But let's take a look and see a little bit about what Torah T'mimah says. So, Ve'ien Baba Batra, Tzadik Ayin, he says, look at the tractate Baba Batra in the Talmud, page 91a, Uvet, and page 2. Ein, it says, they do not. Yotzin me'eretz Yisrael chutza aretz. Says you don't go out of the land of Israel, to go outside the land of Israel. Ella imkain, however, unless amdu satayim besela. So it's saying unless the cost of the food was 2 se'ahs, cost a selah, meaning the cost of food became so prohibitive. So they give you a measure to measure the degree of famine. In other words, it's not just any famine, it's not just any scarcity. It has to be scarcity that is measured in this way. V'chein haya Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai omer, and so Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai used to say, Elimelech, here we go. Elimelech was Ruth's husband, Machlon v'Chilion, the two sons, Dolei Hador Hayu. They were, in fact, leading people of that generation. They were the Gedolei Hador. They were major players of that generation. Umipnei ma ne'enshu, and for what reason were they punished? Because they died, right? Mipnei she'yatzu me'eretz Yisrael lachutz la'aretz chulei, because they went out of the land of Israel to outside the land of Israel. They went from Israel outside the land of Israel. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha Omer, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha says, Lo mishum ze ne'enshu, they weren't punished on account of this. Ela mipnei shahaya lahem levakesh rachamim al dormam, because as leaders of their generation, they should have pleaded for mercy on their generation. And because they did not, as a leader, you realize you are responsible for the people you lead. And if there are trouble, if your generation is troubled and you are a leader in that generation, you have to do all you can, one of which is to seek divine help for that generation. The Harambam, and so you can see that I think Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is trying to harmonize what Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is saying because of this particular passage that we just had. In other words, he's trying to find a compromise position with what we just read and what happened to Naomi's husband and sons. V'harambam beperek he halacha tet mimlachim, and Maimonides in chapter 5 and paragraph 9 of his section on Malachim, he's referencing to the Yod HaChazakah, the Mishneh Torah that the Rambam authored, this magnificent encyclopedic work on halacha, and that he put into very straightforward Hebrew, elegant Hebrew, and just it's encyclopedic in nature. At any rate, there's a section that's called Malachim, Kings. He decided, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He holds like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Uvi'er Hadvarim, and this is how he explained the matter. V'zeh Leshono, quote. V'afalpi, this is what the Rambam says. V'afalpi, despite the fact, shemutar latzeit, that you're allowed to go out. Ena midat chasidut. It is not considered to be a religious, an act of chassid. A chassid is someone who's a God believer and is imbued with the precepts of the Torah and a knowledge of it and applies it to his life. At least this is the non-political definition. So it's not the way to be observant and religious. And that really, it is not a great way to translate midat chasidut. The word chesed, of course, means kindness. So here we have chasidut as a different kind of noun there. Sha'arei, because indeed, Machlon v'Chilion, Shnei Gdolei Hador Hayu, because Machlon and Kilion, those two sons, were two of the great ones of that generation, Umipnei Tzara Gdola, and on account of a really terrible troubles, Yatsu, they left. V'nitchayvu kliya lamakom, and in God's presence, they were now deserving of death, essentially ending the makom God. In other words, God considered them worthy of death. Ad kan leshono, that's the end of the quote from Maimonides. V'tema, and the Torah T'mimah says, this is a surprise. I find his Maimonides' remarks surprising. Shelo he'ir mikan, because he did not explain from this particular reference here that we're talking about in Genesis here, she'Avraham yatsa me'eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz, because Abraham went out, he left the land of Israel to go outside the land, mipnei ha'arav, on account of the famine. V'im kain, and if that's the case, mevu'ar, it becomes explained, dehechi demutar latzeit, that if one is permitted to go out, mutar lachuli alma, any person should be allowed to go out, right, to do this. Ulefizeh hadat, and according to this, the opinion noteh ke Rabbi Shua ben Korcha. It should actually follow the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, right? Remember who said that the reason that they died is because they did not pray for mercy, not because they left the land of Israel. Detam onsham shel Machlon v'Chilion, because the reason of the punishment of Machlon and Kilion, lo haya mipnei yitzi'ah zo, it wasn't because they left the land of Israel under those circumstances, ela mitam acher, but it was for a different reason, which I just explained. Kemevoar, as is explained, vedok, and this is in fact, he thinks, this is a good question on the Rambam, and as to why the Rambam followed Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and didn't follow Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. And that's what we're going to leave it for today. And if you have any comments, of course, I'm very happy to hear them. So, just what can I say except just food for thought, right? Let's see here. Actually, next time it's actually in a different place. Forgive me. Let's do that. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to do it here. Mitzrayim, that would be where we actually would do it. So let me put in the marking there. And we'll return at some point to continue the Torah T'mimah. So just to make sure I have it in the right place. Very good. And I'll stop the share. All right. Before I stop the recording, anything for the record?
Yeah, they uh, Abraham before Gomorrah was destroyed, he says there's 50 righteous people there. Then he went down to 10 righteous people, and then 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and finally there was no righteous people. Then but he prayed before that Gomorrah was destroyed. He said, God, don't destroy it. There's righteous people in there, but there wasn't. But but that's what they did with I. They should have prayed before I was destroyed and did what God wanted. Don't take the spoils and so forth like that. But they did anyway.
One person did. It's just one person. So there's,
Well, that's all it needs. That was
well,
all.
I think it is actually saying how important an individual can be and how an individual can affect the fate of a group. One
Yeah,
individual. So yeah, I think it was a different circumstance in some ways. Um, Abraham, with regards to Sodom and Gomorrah, was saying that if he was saying to God, if there are 50 righteous people, can you still destroy the city? Even though the rest of the city, the rest of the population is uh, wicked. And as a matter of fact, just let me refresh. There were 5 wicked cities that got destroyed. 4 of them got destroyed. One of them was not destroyed. But essentially, there were 5 wicked cities. And when Abraham said 50 righteous men, he meant 10 men, at least 10 men in each city. And then he asked God all the way down to 10. That's the last number he presents, meaning that at least if there are 2 righteous men in each city, they should survive. He did not go down to 5 because the idea of one person maintaining his righteousness in the midst of such a population is next to impossible. So he did not ask God for that. That is the way our tradition understands the Bible in that particular place. So, but in the case of I, it was, I think, a different. Here we're saying that taking that booty from the city of Jericho was such a severe act, and just how much our fate depends on individuals, both positively and negatively. They're positive examples of where one individual can save an entire population. For example, when Moses prays to God to spare the Israelites after they've performed some wicked acts. So works both ways. With this, I will end our recording.